Hey there, it's your boy Delta City Fox here. It is Saturday morning, June 8th, 2019. I'm here in the Edgewater neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois. Thank you for joining me as I walk northward to pick up some brunch. So today I would like to discuss a very important topic, that of the legalization of all drugs. I am not a drug user, however, I am a very strong advocate for drug legalization, specifically here in the United States and more generally everywhere and anywhere in the world. The crux of my position is that drug abusers are first and foremost medical patients. They are not per se criminals. Accordingly, they need to be treated for their illness, not prosecuted like criminals and incarcerated. Now, I fully acknowledge that drug usage may lead some people to engage in antisocial and destructive behavior. But what I am saying is that our society's cure to this, that of drug prohibition, is much more harmful than the actual illness, that of drug abuse. So I'm going to lay out some common arguments in favor of the drug war, and I'm going to offer up some counter-arguments. Several years ago, I was in law school and I was taking a summer course, and the instructor was a sitting judge. So no knock on the guy, a very nice guy. But his response to the suggestion that we legalize all drugs was that he and other judges may hypothetically decide to do heroin right before presiding over a trial. Someone else made a similar argument that if drugs were legal, then airline pilots would be getting high on meth right before takeoff. My response to these arguments is that there is still professional misconduct. A judge who does heroin right before a trial is going to risk losing his law license and losing his job as a judge. A pilot who does meth right before he pilots an aircraft is going to lose his license to fly. And he should absolutely get fired. And he additionally may be liable in civil court for any damages that he causes, and could be responsible for reckless endangerment, among other criminal charges. Of course, although alcohol is legal, I am sure that there are internal regulations about alcohol use, be it from a government entity or a private business, that you can't be drunk on the job. Likewise, if drugs were legal, your employer would be free to say that you can't get high on the job, or even that you can't use drugs at all, and that there is mandatory drug testing to ensure compliance of this rule. Similarly, if you are a business owner, let's say that you own a hotel, you are free to make a rule that there is no drug use on your property, just like those signs that say, no firearms allowed beyond this point. And honestly, you should be skeptical of a business that would allow its employees to be using drugs in an adverse way, or that would allow its guests or invitees to be using drugs at all on its premises. Additionally, there are legal safeguards. Alcohol is legal, however, if you break the law as a result of being intoxicated or even of being an alcoholic, that is not a valid legal defense against prosecution for your misconduct. An alcoholic who gets behind the wheel and kills someone, or who gets into a bar fight, or who robs someone to pay for his addiction, is still held criminally and civilly responsible. So if you are high on drugs, and you then get behind the wheel and kill someone as a result, or you get into a fight acting a fool as a byproduct of being high on drugs, or rob a bank to pay for your drug addiction, you won't get a get-out-of-jail-free card simply because drugs are legal. So, let's discuss the status quo when it comes to drug prohibition and the drug cartels that are currently supplying the drugs. This prohibition, of course, is really a mirror of alcohol prohibition of the 1920s. You have a demand for drugs, but you limit the supply by making it illegal. That raises the price. Straightforward supply and demand economics. Predictably, the thugs and mafiosos are going to supply the drugs, as they are attracted by the high profit margins. In the 1920s, high profit margins from the sale of illegal alcohol made the mafia super powerful. Likewise, the high profit margins from the sale of illegal drugs has made the drug cartels super powerful in today's world. Moreover, because you are forced to purchase drugs on the black market, you don't have the safeguards that legal vices like alcohol do currently. If drugs were legal, you'd be purchasing it from a white market business and not from shady black market drug dealers. If you got bad drugs, you could take the drug supplier to court or arbitration. Currently, alcohol is subject to regulation, albeit government regulation, from the Food and Drug Administration. Whereas, because drugs are illegal, they face little to no regulation today. Moreover, if you are addicted to drugs, or if you or a friend overdose on drugs, there is often an enhanced apprehension about seeking help, because it would be acknowledging that you have engaged in an illegal activity. So, next you have the argument that it is necessary for government to police people's leisure activity for them, because there are people in our society who are too stupid, too ignorant, or too foolish to not engage in the usage of harmful drugs. My counter-argument is that property rights start with your body. You own your body, and accordingly, if you want to be bad to your body, that is completely your prerogative. You need to police your own morality. Any government, especially the federal government, cannot police your morality for you. If people are ignorant to the harmful effects of drugs, then they must be persuaded not to use drugs through reason, evidence, and by teaching them good critical thinking skills. For those of you who grew up in the 80s and 90s, you may recall McGruff the Crime Dog, Officer Friendly, and Dare to Keep Kids Off Drugs. Likewise, there was a film from the year 2000 called Requiem for a Dream that showed the adverse effects of heroin use. I was exposed to these sources as a means to persuade me not to use drugs. Moreover, I had family members telling me that I shouldn't use drugs and why. These tools are much more effective than prohibition is in stopping people from engaging in drug usage. Otherwise, people will engage in drug usage if they don't believe that they'll be caught. And that simply pushes drug usage underground to the black market. Now, I must acknowledge that there is and will be overkill when it comes to trying to persuade people not to use drugs. That is why you need open debate regarding drug usage instead of dogma. Take this clip from the film Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, which mocks some attempts to overly demonize drug usage.
Come on, dude. Just take one hit. Don't you want to be cool? Hey, man. What are you doing? I'm so high! Nothing can hurt me! No!
Marijuana kills.
I love that shit. We're so high right now.
So, a funny clip there. Back when I was in my early teens and I first heard about programs to provide free needles to drug users so that they wouldn't risk spreading HIV through the sharing of needles, I recall thinking to myself, if they're using drugs, aren't they already dead? So, this was the result of the overkill that came with the Just Say No to Drugs campaign. It implanted the idea in many people that trying drugs once would result in your immediate addiction and death soon thereafter. Whereas the reality is that someone who is smoking marijuana, is subjecting himself to a very different level of danger than is someone who is using heroin. So, good critical thinking skills are necessary to make the determination as to how harmful drug usage is. Exaggeration and dramatics about the harmful effects of using drugs is just taking credibility away from the genuine arguments as to why you shouldn't do drugs, be it marijuana, meth, or any other drug. So, some people, like conservative political commentator Ann Coulter, will say that she doesn't mind you hurting yourself while using drugs, but that she still doesn't want drugs to be legalized because she doesn't want to pay for the health care or the welfare of drug users, since here in the United States we have a government-subsidized healthcare system and a very powerful government-subsidized welfare system. So let's take a look at a clip of Ann Coulter discussing this matter with John Stossel.
Now, a ban that the government says is so important, it's the moral equivalent of war. And in fact, the government calls it a war, the war on drugs. We're in our 40th year of this war. How's it working out for us? Drug use hasn't changed much. 19 million Americans have used some illegal drug last month, they say. Dealers still murder each other and bystanders. SWAT teams break into people's homes. You know, there are more than 100 such raids in America now every day. The drug war is the reason we lock up a higher percentage of our citizens than any other country, more than Russia, Rwanda, Cuba. But it's worth it, say conservatives like Ann Coulter, which depresses the heck out of me because you're so smart. Why don't you get the folly of this drug war?
I have one statement for you, the welfare state. No, people cannot do whatever they want to do, live however they want to live, as long as Ann has to pay for it when they can't hold a job and raise their own kids and buy their own food and pay their own rent. You get rid of the welfare state and we'll talk about people sitting home shooting heroin all day. But right now, and now I have to pay for their health care.
So because we have a socialized welfare system, we have to give up all these other freedoms? Because people...
Yeah, as long as Ann is paying for it.
How about motorcycles? They be illegal?
No, because they tend to kill themselves. Same thing with smoking. Smokers die early. The tobacco companies won't tell you that, but smokers save the Social Security Administration
money. Save us money on Social Security. Good. So they're helping us out.
Yes, they are. But as long as we have a welfare state, we have to care what people do with their lives and whether they can be productive citizens. Now, if you got rid of the welfare state, then I would say, I'd just go back to the Constitution. I think the Founding Fathers got it right. Let the states decide, let the localities decide, and then, you have a 50-state competition. One state will be legalizing prostitution and drugs and, all the other things you wacky libertarians love. Another state, the nice conservative states like Alabama, will not. And we can compare and see what policies work, what policies lead to a productive, happy citizenry. But until you get rid of the welfare states, not interested in hearing about welfare or legalizing drugs.
So, Ann Coulter doesn't want to pay for your welfare or for the medical treatment for drug usage or for drug rehabilitation, but she is perfectly fine paying for your incarceration. She has never expressed any concern at all about the money being spent by government enforcing or policing the prohibition of drugs, or the money being spent incarcerating drug users or drug suppliers. So, in her world, the police are working for free. It costs nothing to the taxpayer to lock people away in prison for years and years, and the entire war on drugs is free of charge to the taxpayer. In other words, Ann Coulter would rather pay for the incarceration of drug users instead of their rehabilitation. Additionally, the war on drugs is a huge jobs program for police forces across the country, and for the Drug Enforcement Agency, for the Coast Guard, for the prison industrial complex, just to name a few. So, Ann Coulter is fine with these extremely expensive jobs programs, just as long as she doesn't have to pay for your health care or your welfare. Come on now, that's a completely contradictory argument. You would also think that someone like Ann Coulter would want to tax the heck out of legalized drugs as a new form of revenue for the government. So you can imagine that I was very disappointed when John Stossel didn't call out Ann Coulter on this blatant inconsistency. Now, likewise, speaking of jobs programs, a few years ago, I suggested to a gentleman that I played intramural soccer with that we needed to legalize all drugs. He was very much in favor of legalizing marijuana, but he was firmly against legalizing other drugs. His rationalization was that if legal businesses were selling drugs instead of the drug cartels, then the drug cartels would be doing something much worse, like human trafficking. So essentially, he was endorsing the continuation of the drug war as a jobs program for criminals. That would play out like this. The government can't win or lose the drug war. Instead, the government needs to continue the drug war so that criminals have something to do that's really bad, but isn't really, really bad. So really a silly argument. Next, let's explore who the drug war is affecting in our society. A major component of police engaging with and unjustly detaining minorities, especially black and brown people, is the war on drugs. So police need probable cause in order to arrest you, but they only need reasonable suspicion in order to detain you. Reasonable suspicion is more than just a hunch. It is the rational inference of specific and articulable facts that would lead a reasonable police officer to believe that a crime has occurred, is occurring, or is about to occur. Let's say that you're driving in your automobile and you're stopped by the police for a broken taillight. Should the police then get a hunch, by profiling you strictly based on your appearance, that you are up to something nefarious, the police can then get reasonable suspicion simply by saying that they smelled marijuana, or that you were acting oddly as though you were on drugs, or that you were acting oddly as though you were a drug courier. Now, you may be released after the police find that you aren't engaged in illegal activity. However, it's too late. Your privacy has already been violated. The police can also stop you for a reason unrelated to drugs. If they find drugs on you, even though it wasn't the original reason that gave the police reasonable suspicion to detain you in the first place, it would still give the police probable cause to arrest you. The truth is that the war on drugs equips the police with a lot more tools in gaining both reasonable suspicion and probable cause to both detain and arrest people, and it gives them a lot more latitude when the police subjectively profile people. So don't say that you are against police harassment or that you are against driving while black or driving while brown, but that you are in favor of the drug war. It's like saying that you don't like the symptoms of a disease, but that the disease itself is A-okay. Next, the war on drugs is a very classist war. The reality is that if you are charged with a drug crime, but you have the financial resources to retain a formidable private attorney, chances are that the criminal punishment inflicted on you by the government is going to be a lot more palatable than if you are assigned a public defender to represent you. So earlier I talked about the need for good critical thinking skills as a measure to get people to not use drugs to begin with, and that certainly is very important. But another reason that people begin using drugs in the first place is that they are self-medicating for some sort of trauma, often violent trauma. It may be because they suffered as a child from dysfunctional violent parenting. Or it could be that they experience combat-related trauma while serving in the military. Now, while you cannot attend a regular Alcoholics Anonymous meeting if you are not an alcoholic, you can attend an open AA meeting. I attended one of these open AA meetings a few years ago, and one of the speakers was an American military combat veteran who fought in Afghanistan and had been self-medicating for PTSD with drugs while he was in the service. As a result, he was dishonorably discharged from the military, and stories like his are unfortunately not uncommon. So, minorities, poor people, and our military veterans are collateral damage of the war on drugs. Accordingly, you can see how pernicious the war on drugs is. To finish off, let me make clear that it is definitely a tragedy when someone dies from drug use. However, at least that person made a decision. Whereas the 10-year-old kid who dies from a stray bullet as a byproduct of the drug war didn't make a decision. A decision was made for him. So that is what the drug war does. It socializes the negative effects of drug use to not only include the drug user and his immediate friends and family, but to also include the rest of our society. And that is why our remedy is worse than the actual illness. Drug prohibition is much more destructive than drug usage is. Accordingly, we need to legalize drugs. I know that it's a provocative idea, but it's the truth. I really appreciate you taking the time to consider this thought-provoking topic. Please feel free to let me know in the comments section if I missed something or if you agree or disagree. I will see you in the next video, and take care until then. Bye now.